Hi, everybody. I am Sarah Kirksey, Senior Director of Educational Travel at the National WWII Museum, and I am joined today by three of my most favorites. They're dear friends, colleagues with the National WWII Museum, and they're going to be traveling with me in October of 2025. With me is John C. McManus. He is the Curator's Distinguished Professor of U.S. Military History at the Missouri University of Science and Technology. He's one of the nation's leading military historians. His current project is the major 3-volume history of U.S. Army in the Pacific Asian Theater during World War II. He's published multiple books on D-Day, including The Americans at D-Day, The American Experience at the Normandy Invasion, The Americans at Normandy, The Summer of 1944, The American War from the Beaches to Blaze, and of course, his other bestseller, The Dead and Those About to Die, D-Day, The Big Red One at Omaha Beach. He is also a co-host for the We Have Ways of Making You Talk in the USA alongside Al Murray and James Holland. And speaking of James Holland, we have him with us as well. He's a best-selling author and historian, writer, and broadcaster. His podcast, We Have Ways, is one of the most popular World War II history podcasts. He regularly appears on television, radio, and documentaries. He is co-founder and the program director, as the Chalk Valley History Festival, as well as the War Fest. He is the fellow of Royal Historical Society. And to name just a few of his many, many books, he has written The Allied Strike Back, 1941 to 43, Sicily 43, The Assault on Fortress Europe. His most recent, coming out now, is Casino 44, The Brutal Battle for Rome, and of course, Normandy 44, D-Day and the Battle for France. And lastly, but definitely not least, is our expert battlefield guide from Normandy, Pierre-Samuel Natanson. He has been working with the National World War II Museum for many years. He was a part of the big 70th, 75th, and 80th anniversaries of D-Day. He leads our D-Day flagship tours, our Easy Company tours, private tours, small group tours, and of course, he is an expert battlefield guide for this tour that we're about to talk about, the Paris to Pointe du Hoc, a voyage along the Seine River to the beaches of Normandy. So, welcome everybody. That was quite the mouthful and introduction, but thanks guys for being here.
Great.
Oh, it's absolutely pleasure. I've just realised that the lighting in my Normandy hotel room where I'm doing this is giving me a little the shadow makes me look like I've got a Hitler moustache. I don't really.
Well, you usually look like that, James. So I think
normally I'm super clean shaven. I've gone for the Mountbatten look for normal. I think that's my normal approach.
Well, James just returned from Sicily, and he's actually reporting live from Normandy, as well as, of course, Pierre, who does live there. John and I are here in the U.S., and it's just so much fun being with all of you guys. Because I mean, like I said, you're good friends. We've traveled together for years. We've been here in New Orleans or in Normandy or in other places. So I'm excited to have you.
Well, I'm excited to be here because it's been a while since I've been doing a tour with you, Sarah. And as far as I'm concerned, doing it with you and John and Pierre that's the dream team.
Absolutely. Well, there we go. I think we can end the webinar now. That was all you had to say.
It is absolutely the dream team for sure. Wish we could go today.
I know. Actually, I'm I just got back and I'm ready to return to Normandy. It's my home away from home.
Let's talk a little bit about too much time in Normandy. That's the bottom line.
Yes, I agree. Mm-hmm. So everybody, for the Paris to Pointe du Hoc, we're going to fly into Paris and you're going to transfer to the beautiful Joie de Vivre. This is a river cruise by Uniworld, and we're going to start sailing down the Seine River to Normandy. And while we're sailing to Normandy, we will visit sites like Versailles, the Hall of Mirrors. We go to the Chateau Gaillard. This is the 12th century chateau of Richard the Lionheart. But of course, we go to sites that are pertaining to D-Day and World War II. One of them being La Roche-Guyon. John, talk a little bit about the famous chateau on the Seine and its significance to D-Day.
Yeah, so La Roche-Guyon was home to Erwin Rommel's headquarters. He was, of course, the commander of Army Group B, which has responsibility for the defense of the entire northern coast of France. And so Rommel would kind of commute from that headquarters to the northern coastal areas because, as we all know, he felt very strongly that the invasion had to be stopped at the waterline, and this was more or less his obsession. So you get the chance to go and see this place that really has a lot of history that predates World War II in terms of the family that owned this chateau that becomes Rommel's headquarters and what it is today. You know, some of the post-war history. There's some really kind of interesting like an orchard that leads to it in a little town that's sort of clustered around the chateau. And so you can go kind of just room to room and really get a feel for what it would have been like when Rommel and his headquarters folks were there. It's not all that different now, and it sort of brings it to life for you. And it's a really easy commute too from the boat, because Joie de Vivre docks, and then a couple 300 yards away there's La Roche-Guyon, the chateau. So I like going there because I think it's just a little tangible piece of that history, especially like the run up to D-Day. And of course, famously, the longest day kind of starts from that perspective. And so I think it's interesting from that point of view too.
Yeah. And of course, Pierre, James, at any point in time, just interrupt me if you want to interject and add anything, please do. But from there, we leave La Roche-Guyon and we actually go to one of my favorite places on the tour. We go to Rouen and Dieppe. But James, we talk a little bit about the landings in August of 42.
Yeah, well, I always get a bit depressed going to Dieppe. It's a beautiful place and it's a great place to visit. But obviously this is a big black cross for the Allies. It doesn't go terribly well. Lots of Canadians and others get killed. Lots of fighter planes get shot down. It doesn't achieve what it intends to achieve. It's and I think part of the reason is because the people who are planning it, they don't really know what they're trying to do with it. Is this a raid in force? Is this just an outside commando raid? What is it? And it goes badly wrong. I suppose they learn lessons in so much that they know that if you're going to do something, you've got to go big or you've got to go small, but you can't go medium or kind of small medium. But important lessons, the images of kind of knocked out Churchill tanks and Canadian dead on the beaches and stuff. They kind of linger. It's a great place to visit, though, because it's a beautiful part of the coastline. And so many lessons are learned in the Dieppe raid, I think. So I think it's really worth going. And it's really important to understand that this is the summer of 1942. So Americans have only been based in the UK since January that year. This is a predominantly British and Canadian show. Although there are some Rangers, there are some new Rangers. I think 50 of them go on this trip. So it has got some American involvement. But it's fascinating. But it's I don't know. I always prefer it when the Allies are winning.
Well, and Pierre-Samuel, of course, this isn't one of our normal stops on our D-Day tours to go to Dieppe. So, what is it like for you to change it up as the guide and to be able to bring people to Dieppe?
Well, I mean, first of all, I agree completely with what James just said. It's a beautiful place, amazing cliffs overlooking these pebble beaches, lovely little seaside resort. Dieppe is a really beautiful little fishing harbor, and the story itself does add a lot. It's an amazing story. It's a very sad story. Even in the sort of disaster that was the raid, there are amazing stories of heroism, Victor Cross. It links with some of the commando stories that we talk about in Normandy. Lord Lovat was at Dieppe in 42, but more importantly, I think it gives going to Dieppe gives depth to the rest of the touring. It's I get visitors that come here to Normandy and I don't want to generalize, but to some Americans it feels like World War II starts at D-Day. If you think about it, to use an analogy, if World War II is an American football game, D-Day is really the start of the fourth quarter. And what you get at Dieppe is what happens before, and the attempts and how the Allies are trying to figure out what this thing this large-scale landing is going to look like, and that gives an amazing amount of depth. And there's another really interesting element is that the raid on Dieppe is the subject of really interesting debates still today amongst historians. And so it gets discussions going. So great place.
What's it all about, the Enigma machine? I mean, that's
Was it or not? Yeah, I mean, exactly.
Yeah,
And that's one of the things we can talk about. And I'd add too, in relation to the Rangers, there's two markers there today, memorial markers, and a new one that's just in the last couple of 3 years or whatever, and then an older one too that are really interesting to see. I think there were two Rangers who lost their lives in the raid, if I'm not mistaken.
And the first American soldier to die in mainland Europe died at Dieppe, and was from Louisiana.
Mhm.
Right.
He was. So once that's 4 nights on the cruise. We're on the Joie de Vivre for 4 nights. Then we're going to disembark into drive over to Bayeux. This, of course, is the stunning staff favorite. You'll have time to explore the town, go shopping, visit the gorgeous cathedral, have lunch on own. But then we go to our 2 chateaus that we'll stay while in Normandy. One of them being the Chateau Geneviève, the other Chateau, the Dreux. They're both beautiful. They're both stunning, but they both have a World War II connection. And James, you actually write about the Dreux in one of your books. If you'll tell me a little bit about what happened at the Dreux.
Well, it's infamous for being for the woods behind being where members of the 12th SS went executed a number of Canadian prisoners. But for me, it's all about the Sherwood Rangers, because after I did my Normandy book, I did a project following a particular tank regiment, and this was the Sherwood Rangers, which were the most decorated single unit in the British Army in the whole Second World War. And they're just an ordinary tank unit using Sherman tanks, American Shermans. And really, I kind of suppose they speak for the experience of armored crews, whether they be British, Canadian, American, or whatever. But anyway, a Dreux plays a big part of it, because they move onto a hill which is just above a Dreux called Pointe 103. It's a really, really significant part of the battle, and they end up spending most of June in that area. So just like a couple of miles south of Dreux. So I'm very fond of it. And actually, the first time I ever came to Normandy was 2004 for the 60th, and I came with a friend called David Christopherson. And David Christopherson said, "Oh, I've got I'm sure my dad was here somewhere, and I've got this map." And he pulled out this map, and there was circled Pointe 103, which was literally, a matter of a quarter of an inch on the map from a Dreux, where we were staying. So I said to David, "Come on, let's go. We'll go and investigate. It's only an inch from where we're staying. Let's go and have a look at it." So we walked up the road and went and found Pointe 103. And I remember vividly, we're going down this lane, tree-lined lane on this kind of high bit of ground, and you could half close your eyes and you could almost see the Sherman tanks and the trucks of this armored regiment lined up along this trackway. It was one of the most formative moments. It's the moment that really got me totally sucked into the Normandy battle, that experience of the 60th anniversary. And since then, David and I have become really, really bosom pals. We're super tight. And out of that came this book, because it all started with the story of his dad, Stanley Christopherson, who ended up commanding this regiment for much of, he took over command on the 13th of June, 1944, and commanded it right through to the end of the war in May 1945. And so, yeah, it's a place that's very close to my heart, I have to say. I can't wait to go back there.
And Pierre, what about you? Talk about the Chateau Geneviève. Give a little background of what happened there.
Can I add something on Audrey? Of course, Audrey is mostly famous for its history during the battle, but the owner of Audrey in 44 has an amazing story. And in fact, the family owned the chateau until relatively recently. It's one of the oldest property in Normandy, dates back to the 11th century. But the owner in 44 was a gentleman by the name of Philippe Livry-Level, World War I veteran, fought again in the Battle of France in 1940, left to join the Free French in 1940, volunteered to join the Royal Air Force at 43, had to lie on his age to get in, flew Halifax and Mosquitoes for most of World War II, came back to his property after the war, and actually became a member of Parliament in that area. So very, very deep World War II connection. Geneviève, the other chateau, has it's a more recent property, but it's an absolutely amazing. I mean, the gardens of Geneviève are just absolutely stunning. It was occupied by the Germans, although I've never really been able to find exactly what unit used it. It is, however, captured quite quickly by British forces, but then was used by the Americans. Chenevier, the Chateau Chenevier is only about a mile from the small harbor of Port-en-Bessin, which was both the limit between the Anglo-Canadian sectors and the British-Canadian sectors, I should say, and the American sectors. And Port-en-Bessin became the largest oil terminal in the world in the summer of 1944. So some of the installations linked to the amount of petrol that the Allies were using were on the grounds of the chateau. Just to give you an idea how much that represents, a Sherman tank that James was just mentioning does half a mile to the gallon. So a lot of it.
Well, and Pierre, you said it was a more recent chateau. It is.
Oh, by French standard, I
18th
mean
century.
recent.
By French standards, it is relatively new, but it's 18th century. And John, you have anything to add at the chateaus?
Yeah, I just think it's a really interesting part of Normandy because it's, Port-en-Bessin is walkable from Chenevier, and there's a golf course nearby, so you get a little bit of modern, but also like Pierre was saying, I mean, there was a lot going on there with pipeline under the ocean and a lot of the vestiges that you have from the armies coming through there as a kind of a transit point. I just think is really, I've done a lot of walking around there, and I enjoy just kind of wandering around, getting towards Port-en-Bessin and kind of seeing from that vantage point. Because usually we're at Omaha, and coming up from that direction, I think it's interesting to come from inland. Chenevier is just dripping with history, and it's also just a really luxurious place to stay in. So it's fun from that standpoint. The food is absolutely incredible. And the staff are first rate, so you have it's like what the World War II Museum does. It gives you these incredible luxurious accommodations and then the deep dive World War II history, which, I mean, as my buddy likes to say, what's not to like, right? And it's the ultimate.
Well, yes, it's a great hotel. It is an absolutely gorgeous hotel, but also Port-en-Bessin is the site of a really fantastic battle on D+1 with the commandos going in, and that's a great story all on its own. And actually, if you do go down to the port there and have a little wander around, you can see remainders of bunkers up on the cliffs either side, and these were scenes of really pretty heavy fighting on the 7th of June 1944.
Well, and so we're now in the heart of Normandy, and obviously we're talking about World War II history. And let's talk a little bit about the itinerary that we'll be doing while we're staying at these two gorgeous chateaus. So the first day is actually the British sector. This, of course, is Pegasus Bridge, Long-sur-Mer. We go to Aramache. We go to Sword, Gold, and Juno Beach. Let's talk a little bit about what guests are going to see and learn from that day. Don't go too deep dive, but what's going to happen this day.
Well,
who wants to go first? Okay.
well, the British and Canadian beaches are Sword is a swollen beach because it's a very small beach, but it's a swollen division, so it's the British 3rd Infantry Division, but swollen by the Commander Special Forces Brigade, and it's linked inextricably to the capture of Pegasus Bridge, which I know we're going to as well. And Juno Beach is amazing. We should never, ever underestimate the contribution of the Canadians, who massively punch above their weight as a proportion of the population to what they achieved in the Second World War. And actually, as a proportion of casualties, as a proportion of the number of men landed, they suffer the most on D-Day. I mean, obviously, the worst are on Omaha Beach, but there's 2 divisions. There's only 1 division in the Canadian front. And it's bad, and it's a fascinating place to visit because they come off the beaches and they're straight hit this sea wall, and then they've got in Saint-Aubin particularly, they've got this kind of narrow labyrinth of small streets and roads which they've kind of sort of got to get through. And there's some fantastic little tiny stories which I'm really, really looking forward to sharing with everybody when we get there. Gold Beach is the big one, and you've got the new British Memorial there, which is just people absolutely stunning. I mean, it is properly breathtakingly stunning. Overlooks Gold Beach, is gorgeous. And it's really profoundly moving. And I always find there's a lot of dust in the air there. I find myself having to kind of just get that dust out of my eye a lot. It's really, really stunning, really beautiful. And those 3 places, they're really worth seeing. And it's always fun as well. And what we'll do is I'll make sure I've got some photos to hand, because It's really fun marrying up what happens on the day, on D-Day and around the invasion time with where we are now. And you can go, see this picture here? We're standing on that exact spot. And there's something really always incredibly moving, I think, about being on the precise place and marrying up what you're looking at today in 3D and full color with that kind of black and white photo taken on, let's say D-Day.
Mm-hmm. John or Pierre, you want to add anything to that, or you want to go on to the next day, which is Airborne, St. Mary Glees, Utah Beach, Breakcourt Manor?
I think James covered it pretty well. We do start at Pegasus, which is always a good thing to start at Pegasus because that's the first action of D-Day. So, keeping in the
there
spirit
earlier
of the
today.
So yeah.
In the museum, there's amazing.
Yep. Yeah. It is. But the American Airborne and Breakcourt Manor, I mean, obviously it's iconic because of the Band of Brothers series. And again, it's that same thing. You're walking the ground that is in many ways so sort of familiar, and yet it's, for those of you who haven't been to Breakcourt before, it sort of is like the TV program, but also completely different. So there's things about it which you sort of think, oh yeah, okay, I get that. But when you're there, it's always, this is the beauty about walking the ground. It's always somehow never quite how you imagine in your mind. And so you have this paradox of it being familiar but unfamiliar. And then Utah Beach is just a great place because you get this great view running off the ridge, where you basically come out of Breakcourt Manor. There's the Dick Winters Memorial. You're down on the ridge, and you suddenly sort of go, oh, okay, I see how the land works. I see how it all fits together. And actually, Utah Beach, although it wasn't it wasn't quite as heavily contested as others, or nothing like as heavily contested as others, it's still a really important place to visit and really moving place to visit. Wouldn't you agree, John?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that you can really get a good sense of the terrain because the sight lines are good. You get this vista up and down the Cotentin Peninsula, and we can make the point that really the biggest danger you've got as an American soldier coming ashore at Utah Beach is the inland artillery, those batteries that are farther up the coast. And you can kind of stand there on the beach and kind of look in that direction. You can get a sense of just how, how formidable those batteries could be and were along the coastline in the central Cotentin, Crisbec and Azaville, places like that. And then, pushing further inland, as Jim had mentioned about Breakcourt, I'm going to say something sort of oxymoronic, but it's very innocuous, makes it dramatic. So in other words, if you just look at it with everyday eyes, oh, this is just a field on somebody's farm, and yet obviously we know a little more of the context. And when you get a little deeper dive and you hear, from the historians and our veterans accounts that we have, and of course we can marry that up with what we've seen in Band of Brothers, which is a really good portrayal, but not 100% on target, like James had said, that the terrain is different, and this is what it actually was. And so you really do get a sense of the scale and size of this engagement. And then too, I think here, when you're looking back towards Utah Beach, you get a sense of why this place is important, of why a battery there could be a really dangerous thing to amphibious troops coming ashore at Utah Beach. It's one of the things I like about that area of Normandy. Though there's hedgerows around, nonetheless, there are some pretty good sight vistas that give us a sense of why, this kind of ground would be formidable and why the battles fought the way it was.
Well, John, earlier in the webinar, you mentioned the longest day. And so, of course, on this day, we're going to St. Mary Glees, and then we go to Lafayette Bridge. Talk a little bit about what we'll see in St. Mary Glees and Lafayette.
Yeah, Seine River, of course, is the entire nerve center of the American airborne landings, and obviously in the movie you have scenes portrayed that are, we love to argue about the questionable accuracy of all this, but while still, by the way, deeply respecting the work of Cornelius Ryan, who I think is just the foundational D-Day historian, the father of D-Day historians. In a way, we're all walking in his footsteps in that sense. But also we've got a filmmaker involved too, Daryl Zanuck, who's taking it in his own direction. So it's fun to kind of parse out what did happen and what didn't happen when we go there, to argue about whether John Steele really was on the steeple and all this good stuff. You can actually go into the church where all this happened, the original church, and you can really get a sense of this. And it's, it is history come to life. And in in traversing the area, you really do see a lot of the landing spots, and you can see, why this is an attractive place for the airborne to come down. You visit the Airborne Museum, which, as James said, is just an amazing, amazing place. It's just very, very well done. And then, of course, you get on to Lafayette, which I would argue is like the key objective for the American Airborne in Normandy altogether. Why? Because you need it as a transit point to go west in order to cut off the Cotentin Peninsula in order to get to Cherbourg, which the planners believe is the key objective from the American perspective. So all of this really can be done in the space very easily of a day. Very much so. You can deep dive into a lot of places along the way, and I love the flexibility of that too. So there's no downside to this. I think we're all still fascinated with the Airborne all these years later. That's never going to end, nor should it. And it's just fun to go back in there. And I mean, I'm saying this is someone who's been there a million times, much less Pierre, who goes there every day practically. I mean, I'm saying personally, there's always something new or something that gets me fired up again, and it's really, really cool.
Yeah. Oh, and of
If
course, the
I
last day of touring. Oh, go ahead,
Come
Pierre.
sorry, just to add a couple of things to that at that day generally. I don't think it's interesting because although the story of the Airborne is extraordinarily famous, I don't think the Utah sector gets enough attention. And I would argue, Omaha focuses so much attention, but in many ways, it's the crucial one. If things don't work out in that area, if the Allies don't take Cherbourg, then there's really then there's none of the rest is going to work. And just one other quick thing about Sainte-Mère-Église. One of the great things about the museum tour, but the museum tours in general, but especially this one, I think, is that by spending enough time in Normandy, by spending several days and visiting these areas in depth, you not just learn about the history, you also learn how the history is still very much alive here in Normandy, and how this is very close to the heart of the locals. And if there's probably one place that sort of epitomizes that, it's the church in Sainte-Mère-Église. You go in and you find these two magnificent stained glasses that were done in the 50s and 60s, and you realize how the people of Normandy have not forgotten this history.
And thank you for saying that, Pierre, because it is something so important. Bringing, majority American guests to Normandy, and realizing, though, how thankful and grateful that the locals still are, and that they continue to honor the American servicemen. But the last day is definitely probably the most, powerful. We go to start the morning with Pointe du Hoc, but then we go to Omaha Beach, and we will end the day with a Normandy American Cemetery. Guys, anything you want to add to those other than just how incredibly moving it is on that day?
Always a special day for me personally. Having written pretty extensively about all these places, but especially, of course, Omaha Beach. There is something about Omaha Beach that's in my soul. I don't really know why. And again, like these other spots, it's on some level always new to me when I go there. In part, I think sometimes because of who's with us on these tours. They have different perspectives, different stories, sometimes family ties. It's just very interesting to have conversations in that respect. And to, in terms of Pointe du Hoc, to get a sense too, I just constantly make this point, how important that ground is, regardless of whether the guns are there at the moment the Rangers come up or not, to me is really kind of irrelevant. In that sense, that you simply have to have that ground. And so we were talking longest day earlier, that we often push back against that narrative a little bit too. But I also, beyond that, the ground that's inland, and this is a major Ranger objective too, and cutting the coastal road and all the rest that's going to happen from that standpoint. So this is really, the Ranger fight at Pointe du Hoc is obviously iconic, not just for climbing the cliffs, but for really, arguably, but for the fighting that happens the next couple of 3 days before they're relieved. Much less, of course, than Omaha Beach, which can be overwhelming on some levels. It's 5 miles. So we try and personalize this for you on a lot of levels, and that's the part I like about visiting, and we can take it in the direction we want to go. And yeah, this is always a really special day. Much less, of course, the cemetery, where what is it at latest count, 9,388 Americans, I think it is, are laid to rest, and everything that means.
89. Sorry,
89 now.
there's
Right.
a soldier that was buried in at the cemetery since last you came.
Okay. Yeah. See, there we go.
Nathan Baskin. Yeah.
Well, I just want to jump in here because every time you go to Omaha, you pick up something new, some new perspective that you haven't seen before. And I agree with what John says. It's a profoundly moving place, and because you know what happened there, you know these great events that took place there, and it's stunning because you can see the whole thing laid out. You can see the width of the beach, the length of the beach, and the Colville Cemetery is just something like, I mean, if you've never been there before, it doesn't matter what people tell you, it doesn't matter what you say. When you go in for the first time and you just see this sea of graves going on forever, it is overwhelming. It is, you will just gasp. You really will.
Well, and so guys, it's kind of switching gears a little bit. So that's the touring. And of course, it is so moving to end with the Normandy American Cemetery. Everybody will get a white rose. We'll lay a wreath together. And but let's talk about getting to travel with each other. You know, James, you made a joke kind of at the beginning, but I want to start with you, Pierre-Samuel. You know, we're lucky, you and I, that we get to do what we do. But especially when we get to travel with historians like James Holland and John McManus. For a guide, what's it like for you to get to be with these two experts?
Well, it's always a little intimidating, first of all. You know, what I tell the people I meet is what I've read in their books. So it's a little hard to get over that, but it's just a lot of fun, and I really love it. It just adds so much to the touring, so much depth, and you know, the best tours are the tours that turn into a conversation where it's not just sort of one person and a group in front listening. It's when there's a back and forth between historians and I, and between guests and us. So it's just the best way of touring. It's just that's how you get the most out of it.
And James and John, y'all have traveled on several of our tours. And not just Pierre-Samuel, the other guides that we work with. I mean, they truly are the expert battlefield guides, but they add so much. You know, they bring in that local perspective and things that you know, that you two don't necessarily do.
Well, there is that, but also Pierre is he's an old mate, and we've known each other for a long time. And I think the key when guides and historians all work best is when there's a chemistry there. And when you can sort of play off one another and you can get the banter right. And, you know, we always get that with Pierre. It's, you know, that I do really think that's genuinely important, you know, because it's important that all those people that come on these trips have a really, really fantastic time from start to finish. And you want to be with people who enjoy being with each other and who get the best out of each other. And I think that's the case with the three of us.
Absolutely. That's fun, you know. I mean, and I will say, I mean, there are different kinds of skill sets brought to the table here. And Pierre and the other local battlefield historians know this history in a way that I can't, because I'm not there every day. I don't live there. I don't know the ins and outs of the evolution of it. And so I think you know, you can marry that with, so you know, Jim and I have written about this pretty extensively. And of course, we know the battlefields well. I'm not saying otherwise, but I think there's a really good melding of perspectives and skill sets that works to the advantage of whoever's on these tours, because you know, as Jim said, it's chemistry, because each person brings their own perspective that I think adds a richness and a depth to it. Now you add that too, by the way, to the overall hospitality side to it and the logistics, which I mean, Sarah and the other World War II museum folks are just off the charts in how well that's done. Because believe me, I know I've been on a lot of tours over a long time. Look at me, I'm old, you know, so I've been around the block a little bit. I know what quality is, and so I think that's why this ends up being fun, because you're dealing with people who are really at the top of their game. And who respect others and their perspectives, and understand that there's a, you know, there's a limit to anyone's knowledge, and other people can contribute too. And I think this is a really good thing. I just really enjoy that dynamic, I have to say. It's a lot of fun.
Well, thank you, John. And one thing I do want to say, you know, I didn't mention that every evening on the ship or at the chateau. When we're on the ship, we'll all be together. So John and James will get up and have conversations, and they're lectures, but it really is more of a conversation. And what I love is when the historians start to kind of debate or argue, and but then once we're at the chateau, there will be lectures. You know, John, you'll give one, Jim, you'll give one. But it's great because it's the history is there. But yes, we do provide the luxury and the hospitality as well. And then of course our expert battlefield guides, they're just the best. Now, one thing I do want to just end, and you know, this is the last question. Don't think about it too hard, but what is your favorite stop on this tour and that we're going to be bringing guests to? And what are you looking forward to the most? John, you go first.
Well, this may surprise people. It's probably Lafayette because I just, you know, I mentioned earlier the incredible importance of that objective. And I mentioned too, in relation to Brecourt, a place that's innocuousness makes it dramatic. When you look at Lafayette, you just think, well, here's a little tiny bridge and then looks like a lot of farmland around it. Actually, when you can envision it as this choke point major bridge, one of the few you have in Normandy, and this massive flooded area, which we one year we got lucky and there've been a lot of rain, and actually Lafayette was almost exactly like what it was in 1944. So it was very easy to visualize. And of course, we were talking about the Airborne story, and this is very much one of the most dramatic things that happens for the Airborne in all of World War II and in all of its history. And being you know, an historian of that, and also very, very interested in two of the key leaders who are part of that. Matthew Ridgway, I'm writing a biography of him, and also Jim Gavin. I think this is a key moment in both of their careers and their lives, in addition to, of course, so many others. So I don't know. To me, I think it's a really neat place to visit. It's easy to kind of envision what happened there. And you can kind of see how it fits together with the rest of the Normandy invasion and the subsequent Battle of Normandy. So I've really gone to enjoy it over the years.
What about you, Jim?
Well, I do you know what I would have said Lafayette, but John's already stolen that one. So
I stole it from you.
Yeah, he stole one. I do think Lafayette's good. You know, Omaha never disappoints ever. Pegasus Bridge is incredible. La Roche-Guyon, you know, that's where Rommel was, and we're all captivated by Rommel and his story. I suppose if I was going to pick one, it's probably Gold Beach, just because of the new British Memorial there, and because that's where the Sherwood Rangers came ashore, and you know, they're my regiment. So I have a special kind of feeling, a little glow every time I go there. But listen, all of Normandy is fantastic. You know, whatever sector you're in, whether you're in the British, Canadian, or American, the whole thing is just is a place of wonder. And you know, everywhere you go, every single day, it's always completely brilliant.
Pierre, what about you?
Well, since John didn't take it, I'm going to claim it. I'm going to say Omaha. You know, exploring Normandy, studying the Battle of Normandy is a never-ending process. But within that, I find that exploring Omaha is a never-ending process. It's just such an enormous engagement. It's a magnificent beach. It's just, and it's one of these places. You know, I feel lucky that I'm in a way I'm not a historian. I don't write I don't write history. I tell people what happened in certain places, and there's Omaha has this presence, almost this massive beach. The landscape makes sense when you tell that story. And you know, probably one of the most important battle in American military history. And of course, you got the cemetery overlooking it. So yeah, I'm going to say Omaha.
Well, on that, I am going to end this webinar. Thank you to everybody that did join us today. A couple of things I do want to mention. You know, this of course is the Paris to Pointe du Hoc. We do have an opposite sailing that actually starts in Normandy and will end in Paris. That will be led by Dr. Michael Nyberg and Dr. Will Hitchcock. And then both options also do have an extension in Paris. So I just want to thank everybody for joining, Jim and John, which I think we just lost Jim. But John, thank you for joining. Pierre-Samuel, thanks for being here. And we look forward to seeing you in Normandy and traveling on the Paris to Pointe du Hoc, the luxury river cruise sailing down the Seine. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks. Pleasure.